Let me be honest from the start. When you work in a job like mine, you see a lot of things that make you question your sanity. Over the course of my 15-year career as a locksmith, I've encountered a variety of challenges: lockouts, break-ins, lost keys, you name it. However, there is one call that I will never forget, and it continues to make my skin crawl to this day. Many years ago, I got a call around midnight. Not unusual. I've had to do plenty of late-night lockouts. The voice on the other end of the line was shaky, a woman who sounded like she was on the verge of tears. She informed me that she had locked herself out of her house and urgently required assistance. I asked for her address and told her I'd be there in about 20 minutes. When I arrived, the house was in a relatively desirable neighborhood, quiet and dark, except for a single porch light illuminating the front door. The woman was standing outside, wringing her hands. She looked exhausted, her eyes wide with fear. Domestic disputes are common in my line of work, so I assumed she'd locked herself out after an argument or something. I walked up to her and introduced myself. She barely acknowledged me, her eyes darting to the windows like she was expecting someone or something to appear. I asked her what happened, but she just shook her head and whispered, "Please, just get me inside." I set to work on the lock, and that's when I noticed the scratches. The front door had deep, gouging scratches around the lock, like someone had tried to claw their way in. I've seen attempted break-ins before, but this was something different, something desperate. "Do you want to call the police?" I asked, but she shook her head violently. "No," she said, almost pleading. "No police. Just hurry." I managed to pick up the lock fairly quickly. It wasn't a particularly complicated one. As the door swung open, a cold draft hit me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The house was pitch dark, and the air was thick with an unsettling silence. The woman hesitated at the threshold, like she was scared to go inside. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked again. She didn't answer but stepped inside, her eyes scanning the darkness. I was about to leave, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. Normally, I wouldn't intrude, but this time my gut was telling me not to walk away just yet. I followed her inside, flipping on a light switch. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor. The woman moved cautiously, her steps soft and deliberate, as if she were trying not to make any noise. I felt like I was intruding on something intensely private, but I couldn't bring myself to leave her alone. She walked over to a closet door, her hands trembling as she reached for the knob. "It's in here," she whispered. I didn't understand what she meant, but I watched as she slowly opened the door. The closet was empty, except for a few old coats and a pair of muddy boots. She stared into the dark space for a long time, her breathing shallow. "There's nothing there," I said gently, but she shook her head. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It moves. It hides in the last place you'd look." A chill ran down my spine. Her voice had this eerie calmness, like she was stating a fact that was undeniable. I glanced around the room, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. Too quiet. "What hides?" I asked, but she just stared into the closet, her eyes wide and unblinking. And then I heard it, a faint rustling sound like something shifting behind the walls. The woman stiffened, her eyes darting to the ceiling. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. The attic ceiling hatch was slightly ajar, with a thin line of darkness cutting across the white paint. My chest pounded as I realized that the noise was coming from up there. "It comes down at night," she whispered, still staring up at the hatch. "It loves dark places." I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed a chair and pulled it under the hatch. "Stay here," I said, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. I climbed up, pushing the hatch open. A cold breeze hit me again, and I felt like I was about to step into a nightmare. I pulled myself up into the attic, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The attic was empty. It was just old boxes and cobwebs. But as I moved the light around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A series of deep scratches on the wooden beams, leading up to a dark corner. I shined the light in that direction, and that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes reflecting the light stared back at me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The eyes blinked, and then I heard a whisper, soft, raspy, and too close to my ear. "Found you." I nearly fell off the ladder trying to get down, my heart racing like it was about to explode. The woman was still standing there, staring up at me with those wide eyes. "Did you see it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I just grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the front door. "We need to leave," I said, my voice trembling. We ran out of the house and I locked the door behind us, my hands shaking. I don't know what I saw up there, and I don't want to know. All I know is that it wasn't human, and it wasn't supposed to be there. We stood outside in the cold, with the woman crying softly. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but there were no words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "It's in the last place you'd look," she repeated, "and now it knows we know." The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and what had happened. My heart ached with worry for her. Eventually, I decided to help her more directly. I took her to a priest I knew, someone who specialized in dealing with the supernatural. The priest listened to Sarah's story, and after a long conversation, gave her an amulet. He said it would offer protection against whatever was haunting her. Sarah decided to stay with me for a while. I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone, and my heart ached for her in a way I hadn't expected. As time went on, our feelings grew deeper. We fell in love, got married, and started a family. We had 3 wonderful children, each of you. Sarah wore that amulet every day. It became a symbol of our love and the trials we had faced together. We lived a joyful life, despite the shadows of that night lingering in the back of my mind. And now, here we are. You're all teenagers, and tonight, I wanted to share this story with you. It's part of our family's history, a reminder of how your mother and I met and the strength we found in each other. As I finished telling you the story, Sarah decided to get up for some water. I watched as she walked into the kitchen, the soft light from the fridge casting a faint glow in the otherwise dark room. The story had left a lingering chill, and the house seemed eerily quiet. As she reached for the water pitcher, the amulet she always wore around her neck slipped from its chain. It clattered to the floor, and the sound echoed through the stillness. The amulet broke into several pieces, scattering across the tiles. The moment it hit the ground, an unnatural silence fell over the room. The air grew colder, and a heavy, oppressive weight settled in. We all looked at each other, the realization dawning on us with chilling clarity. In that tense silence, the atmosphere seemed to thicken with dread. The sense of security that had once enveloped us evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming fear. The past had suddenly surged back into the present, and the echoes of that night were unmistakably alive. Then, without warning, one of the windows in the living room shattered with a deafening crash. Glass flew everywhere, and we all jumped in shock. The room erupted into chaos as we scrambled to find out what had happened. Amidst the confusion and the shards of glass, the air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. The realization that we had relied on shattered protection was more terrifying than anything we had faced before. With the cold wind howling outside, we stood in the dimly lit room, acutely aware of the unleashed force. The past was no longer just a memory. It had come crashing into our present, and the echoes of that night were far from over.